Good morning, everyone. Let's go ahead and get started. So my name is Kelly Lockhart. I'm a software engineer here with the Astrophysics Data System, ADS, and I'm here to tell you about the new interface. So as you probably know, Classic, our system that had been in existence for over a quarter of a century, just retired at the end of October. So now the new ADS, which you're seeing right here on your screens, is the only oh, hold on, I see we are having some technical difficulties. Okay, I think we can all see that now. Let's go ahead and make that slightly smaller. Okay, let's try this again. So ADS Classic, our system that had been in existence for about a quarter century, was retired at the end of October. And the new ADS, which you can see right here, is now our primary way of interfacing with our database. You'll be happy to know that the database behind Classic and the new ADS, while not exactly the same database technically, we make sure that they contain the exact same content every single day. So you can be reassured that the content that you're used to is still all the same. None of that should change. It's just the way that you're accessing the data that's changed. So if you haven't seen this screen yet, let me give you a quick tour. So when you first come to the new ADS website, you'll see that you're landed on the modern form. And this is just a one-box search, sort of similar to what you see on Google or other modern web browsers. If you're not quite sure what to do with this and you're missing the multi-box form from Classic, you can click on this Classic Form tab right here. And you'll see that we've basically reproduced the same form that you had in Classic. You can enter your authors, publication dates, titles, keywords, anything that you need exactly the same way you could on Classic. You can specify which collection you want to query, whether that's astronomy, physics, general, or if you leave all of them unchecked, you'll be querying everything. You can also specify a date order before you even run your search. So your search results will be returned in whichever sort order that you have specified here. So that's the Classic form. We have one more form, the paper form. If you've seen this form before, you might notice that it's changed just a little bit. We've added some stuff to it in just the last week or so. So here, if you already know what reference you're trying to find, you know the publication year, the publisher, things like that, you can fill all of that out here. If you know exactly the bib code you're trying to find, bib codes are the unique way in ADS that we identify papers. It's our unique identifier. So you can put your bib codes here. And then finally, the thing that's new on this form is this reference query. So say you have a paper and you want to just copy and paste a reference from the reference section and find one of those papers. You just copy and paste it here. We do some magic. We figure out what paper you're looking for, and we will return that paper to you. If you have any questions about any of these, just let us know. For the rest of this demo, I'm going to be using the modern form. But again, feel free, all three of the forms query the exact same database. They're just different ways of accessing the data. The modern form, though, is a little bit more flexible. It lets you have access to our more modern search features and some of the more advanced functionality. So I'll just be focusing on this one for right now. Okay, so let's go ahead and start with a search. So just like in Classic, the up caret designates a first author search. So I'm looking for papers where Kuiper was the first author. And then I'm trying to find a specific paper. I'm trying to find a paper by Kuiper that was published in 1944. So I enter all of those search terms, hit enter, and you can see I have found my Kuiper paper from 1944. So in this particular case, I just entered the year by itself, nothing fancy there, and I was able to find the paper. Sometimes, though, if you enter a search like this, you'll end up with hits to 1944 in the title, maybe, if that happens to belong to an object, maybe in the abstract for some reason. If you're getting a bunch of unnecessary papers, unwanted papers in there that don't belong to that year or something else, you can use a search tag. So what I mean by that, if I start typing year, so I type Y, and then I press enter to accept the autocomplete, then do 1944, basically what I'm specifying in this search is that 1944 should only appear in the publishing date field in the year. So I only want papers where Kuiper is the first author that were published in 1944. In this particular case, it's going to return the exact same paper that we found earlier. In some cases, though, if you have a bunch of junk in your search results, this is going to do a lot to help you figure out your paper that you actually want. And just to reiterate here, I'm not sure if you saw that before, if I start typing Y, you can see that the rest of year is filled out and highlighted. That just means that it's going to autocomplete. I can use my arrow keys to go down to one of these other autocomplete options down here. And then when I have the right one highlighted, I just press enter and then I get the search tag that I want. It makes it a lot easier than trying to type out the whole thing. If for whatever reason you don't know exactly which search tag you're looking for, or you don't know how to type it, there's a few options up here above the search bar. These are some of the most common search tags that you might use. If you want something a little more obscure, click on this drop-down menu here and you can scroll through and see all of the different options we have. In this case, we're just doing some simple searches, so we won't be using that, but just know that it's there if you need it. Okay, so let's go ahead and look at this paper that I spent so long trying to find. So this is what we call the abstract page. This is all the information that we have about a particular paper. You can see we have the title, we have the author. Each of these author links is going to be a hyperlink, so if I click on it, it will do a search for other papers by this author. Here is the abstract that we have for this paper, and then some more metadata about the paper, some more publishing information about it. Including down here is the bib code, so this is our unique identifier. And then you have a bunch more information over here on the left and the right side of the abstract page. So over here on the left, you can see we have information about the citations, so all of the papers that have cited this paper. There aren't any references in this paper. It's an older paper, so they don't always have references like more modern papers do. But if we had references, they would show up here. Co-reads, this means that people who have read this paper have also read the papers in the co-reads list. Similar papers, we do a text analysis on the abstract and title of this particular paper, and then we go through and look for other papers that have similar text in their abstracts and titles. So it's not necessarily based on who has cited who, it's really based on what is in the text. So some of these might be interesting to you. We can also look at the metrics for this paper, so if we want to look at how many times it's been cited and get the histogram of that. We have information about how often this paper has been read, other information in here. And then finally, if you are just trying to get the citation of this paper, if you're trying to get the BibTeX entry so that you can put it in one of your own papers, click on Export Citation. In this case, we default to the BibTeX export format, but you can pick between a bunch of other different export formats if you want. And then we'll just show you all of that entry here. You can choose to either copy it to clipboard, so it just highlights and copies it all, so you can just paste it elsewhere. Or if you want, you can go ahead and download this to file. Okay, let's come back over here. So now we're back on the abstract. Let's move over to the right-hand side here. So over here on the right side, you'll see this full text sources. So if you want to actually go and read the full paper, you can pick one of these links over here. And you'll notice they have different tags here. So ADS means that this is a paper that we have actually scanned ourselves, and we have available in either PDF format or in the original scanned format. Those are in GIFs. The little green dot on each of those means that they're open access. So even if you don't have an institutional subscription to one of these journals, the green dots mean that you can still access them. And then finally, this My Institution link. This means that if you do have an institutional subscription, you're a member of a research institute or something like that, and you have told us what research institute you're a part of, I'll get to that later, you'll see this My Institution link pop up. If you click on this, it will take you to your library's homepage and let you sign in. So you can sign in with your institutional credentials, and then it'll do all the processing for you and pull up the paywalled version of your article. That's, again, if you already have some open access links down here, you may or may not care about the paywalled version. Sometimes, though, especially if you're looking at archived versus published versions, sometimes they differ a little bit, and you do maybe want the published version of a paper. And then the last thing over here, you can see Add Paper to a Library. This little widget will only show up if you are signed into an ADS account. You are not required to have an ADS account. You're not required to be signed into an ADS account at any given point in time. But if you do have an ADS account, you'll have access to these private libraries. And so you'll see this widget show up, and then you can either choose to add this paper to an existing library or create a new library right here and add this paper to it. Not going to do any of that, but just wanted to let you know. So if you don't see this show up again, make sure that you are signed into your ADS account. Okay, so that is the abstract page. Let's go ahead and start a new search. Okay, so another search tag we can use is full. One thing that the new ADS has that Classic did not is we have the ability to search full text of articles. So we have full text available for basically all modern published articles in our database. Some of the historical literature we don't have full text available for. If you ask us whether we have full text for something, we can let you know. We're also working on an interface to let you know what we have full text for. But basically know that if you're trying to search a paper, like a refereed journal article from the last, 15, 20 years, we'll almost certainly have the full text for it. Some of the conference proceedings and things like that, of course, we're not going to because we never get the full text for those. But, so right now I am searching the full text of everything that we have available for Titan. And right now everything is just sorted by date, as you can see up here. Let's go ahead and sort by citation count. So you can see that there's sort of a mix of papers in here that don't really seem to have much to do with each other. In this case, I was searching for that Kuiper 1944 paper that talks about the atmosphere of Titan, so I am presumably searching for more papers about Titan, the satellite. Let's go ahead and click on Show Highlights here, and we can see where exactly Titan shows up in each of these papers. So you can see this first one for NVIDIA Titan Black GPUs, not about Titan the satellite. This one, we mentioned Saturn. This one actually seems reasonable, Saturn's main satellite Titan. This paper, probably not the Titan related to Saturn. So you can see we sort of have a random mix of things in here. If I want to make sure that I am seeing papers that are about Titan the satellite, not Titan that has something to do with computers and convolutional networks, I can click on Astronomy and then Limit To, because I only want to see papers that are in the astronomy collection. And then if I want to do one more filter and say I only care about refereed journal articles, I can do refereed and Limit To. And now we're down to 11,000 papers. Again, I can go ahead, we've bumped back over to the date sort, but I can go over to citation count sort if I want and see some of the most cited papers that were on Titan satellite. You can see this is a much different list than what we had before. Let's go ahead and say that I'm also interested in the Huygens probe. So I am looking for papers about Titan that also mention the Huygens probe. You can see that because I've just modified my search here, we're assuming that this is a modified version of your previous search, not a brand new search. So these facets down here, these little boxes, we call them facets, they still stay in effect. So you can see we're still only searching astronomy papers, we're only searching refereed papers. The only thing is I've limited my search a little bit and I'm now searching for papers that also mention Huygens. If I want to make sure that my papers are matching both Titan and Huygens as best as possible, I could go do that highlights thing again, but what's actually going to work better this time is if I sort by score. So sorting by score means that all the papers at the top have as much to do as possible with all of your search terms. So these are the papers that best match all of your search terms. I can go look at one of these, and if I just do a find in page, I can see that Huygens is mentioned a few times. Titan is also mentioned a few times in the abstract and the title. This paper seems to have a lot to do with both Titan and with Huygens, so it seems like a pretty good match. And the same thing would happen if you go look at the rest of these at the top of the list. They all will be presumably related to both Huygens' work with Titan. Okay, so I think that's it with this particular search. Let's go ahead and start one more new search. One thing a lot of people don't realize is ADS, part of the reason it was called the Astrophysics Data System, one, it used to serve a lot of data, but two, it's originally funded by NASA in order to improve the citability of NASA's data sources. So we have links to lots of different data resources in our database. If you didn't know that, you can go and explore this by using the data search tag. And then one of the other, so NextSci is a database, but we have access to a bunch of different ones. MAST, Keck, Observatory Archive, so KOA, a bunch of different ones. If you go play around with the data facet over here, you can see a lot of the different ones that we have. Chandra. In this particular case, I'm limiting myself just to NextSci. If you want to see a link over to one of the data products, if you hover from the search results over on this little database looking icon here, you can see we have links to both Simbad and to NextSci. I can click over to NextSci just to see what sort of data products I'm talking about. And here you can see we've landed NextSci as the NASA Exoplanet Archive, NASA Exoplanet Science Institute. And we have links to more information about the different planets that were in that particular paper. So basically what I've done by searching for NextSci is I've limited myself to only papers that are talking about exoplanets. So it could be very useful for those of you who are studying exoplanets. If I click on one of these papers, you can see these same data product links are available over here on the right-hand side. And they'll tell you how many data products they have associated with each of those in each of those different databases. Okay, but I am going to play around a little bit with this query. So let's limit myself to just the last 5 years. It's a little hard to see this on my current screen. Here we go. Oh wait, last 5 years. So you can see here I've got my histogram with the last 5 years, and that's what it says in these text boxes. If I click apply, then we're limiting the results that I have to just the last 5 years. And I just want the refereed papers. And let's go ahead and sort by citations. Okay, so these are papers published in the last 5 years that reference the Exoplanet Archive. So these are all exoplanet papers refereed from the last 5 years. Let's go ahead and look at metrics. So you maybe haven't seen these buttons up here. Export just gives you a lot of that same BibTeX information that we talked about earlier. It's just you can do it for the entire search result set. But what I'm really after is explore and citation metrics. So this is going to give you the citations and the reads and a bunch of other metrics for all of the papers in that result set, the search result set. So this first histogram just gives you a histogram of when all these papers were published. The next one is how many times these papers were cited. It's broken out by refereed and non-refereed. That's what the colors over here mean. You can see we have a bunch of other information over here. So most important to some people is this number of self-citations. If you need to report the number of citations your papers have, but you will need to subtract out the number of self-citations. This is an easy way to see what the self-citations is, so you can do that math yourself. So all sorts of information here. Reads is the number of times a paper has been read in ADS, which means that somebody has read the abstract or downloaded the full text. All sorts of stats over here to look at. And then finally at the bottom, we have the different indices. So most people are familiar with the H index. We have a bunch of other ones here. If you don't know, for example, what the Torrey index is, you can hover over the question mark and it will tell you exactly how that's calculated. And then the graph will show you how all of these different indices have changed with time. So that's a fun thing to play with. Another fun thing to play with over here in the Explore menu is this paper network. So the paper network looks at which papers have cited each other and builds a sort of a clustered citation graph. So basically all the papers that cite each other or cite a group of references together, they are considered to be about one particular topic. And so they will be clustered together if this will work. And of course I am on air, so it's not going to work right now. Okay, there it goes. So like I was saying, each of these clusters is theoretically about something in like one particular topic. They cite the same things, or they cite each other. And then we get the text that describes each of these clusters by doing a text analysis on the titles and the abstracts of these papers and pull out the most common unique words in each of these sets. So over here, you can see all of the different clusters that we have. And then on the right-hand side, these are graphs about how popular each of these clusters is as a function of time. So the y-axis shows the number of papers that have been published in each of these years, and then the x-axis is the years themselves. So for example, the K2 was very popular in 2015. Fewer papers now. There's a little bit of a wonkiness in here because I've also sorted this by citation count, and of course more recent papers are not as well cited. They haven't had as much time to be cited. So it's a little bit of a weird way to display this, but you still get an idea about how many of these papers there are. If I want to see what exactly is in each of these, I can click on the wedge, and then we see all of the papers that have ended up in that wedge. There's a little more information. It tells you who the first author is, how many times they've been cited. If you scroll down to the bottom, these are the papers that make these papers alike. So these are papers that were highly cited by the papers within this group. That's basically how we figure out which papers should belong in that group, is all of these papers cited this group of papers. Okay, so that's pretty fun to play with. You can sort of go back and forth between this a lot and just get a little more information here. This is good if you're just now starting to explore a new topic and you want to know what some of the popular subfields are within a broader topic. Okay, one more explore field thing I want to show you. And this one I have definitely set up for myself a little bit to make it make a little more sense. So right now I'm opening our affiliations tab. So our affiliations tab, you know how when you publish a paper, the publisher asks you to fill in your affiliation? Well, we're based here at the Center for Astrophysics. Depending on what paper you're publishing, sometimes you may type in Center for Astrophysics, sometimes you might type in Harvard-Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics. There's a bunch of different ways to type in Center for Astrophysics, including CFA, which you can see over here. Our curators have done the hard work of saying that Center for Astrophysics and Harvard-Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics are the same thing, and we've matched them together. So when over here in the left-hand column, if I click on CFA and limit to, basically anybody who has published a paper that otherwise matches all of these results, and they've published either under CFA or Center for Astrophysics or Harvard-Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics or one of the other many variations, all of those are going to show up, assuming that we have their affiliations information and can match them together. So very useful if you're trying to do any sort of stats for your institution. So I have limited all my papers to just the CFA papers. And let's say I want to only look at papers by John Johnson. So I can select his name over here and say limit to. And now we are limited to just the 32 papers that meet all of these requirements. And let's go ahead and look at the author network. So the author network is sort of similar to the paper network I just showed you, except it's for specific authors. So this works best if you're searching for a specific author as opposed to a more broad topic. If you're searching for a broad topic, sometimes the results are a little wonky. Here in the middle, you can see we have John Johnson's name, and then each of these wedges represents a different co-author network that he works with, or different collaboration that he works with. On the outside, you can see these are popular, or some of the main members of some of these collaborations. If you're familiar with this field, you might recognize some of these names. If you want to see, oh, and again, over here on the right-hand side, these are how often these papers have been or how many of these papers have been published by each of these collaborations. You can see the yellow collaboration is one of the most fruitful collaborations. They produced a lot of papers in the last 5 years. So if you want to see papers by the yellow collaboration, you can click on the yellow wedge, and these are all the papers by the yellow collaboration. Not all of the papers in the yellow collaboration were co-authored by everybody in the yellow collaboration, so this just tells you how many authors from this group were co-authors on each of these papers. If you're particularly interested in one co-author, you can click on the outer wedge. You can see these just represent each of the individual authors. So let's click on one of these. So these are papers that were written by John Johnson with just one of his collaborators instead of with this whole collaboration network. So this is really useful if you have a colloquium speaker coming to speak and you're a little curious about what exactly they've been working on, who they've been working with. Also, if you are doing if you're on like a hiring committee and you want to know a little bit more information about a particular candidate, this is a nice way of getting an overview of what they're working on and who they're working with. Okay, so that I think covers the main search things. Let me show you a little bit about setting up your user account if you have a user account. So I am signed into my user account right now. If I click on Customize Settings, so I was telling you earlier about how you could click on the My Institution link, and then it would take you to your library login screen. And this is how it knows which library login screen to take me to. If I click on Update, you can see we have a bunch of different libraries in here. All you need to do is just pick whichever library you are affiliated with, whichever research institute you're affiliated with, and just say Apply. And then when I click on the My Institution link, it will automatically take me to Harvard's library's login page. So that way I can go and get any paywalled articles that I need. So very useful. This is only available to you if you do have an ADS account. But again, no need to get an ADS account if you don't need this stuff. The other thing is application settings. So these control how ADS looks to you and how it works for you. Just a little bit. There's not a ton you can change here, but there's definitely some very important things in here. So some of this top stuff is pretty self-explanatory. One thing I'll point out is if you know you really like the classic style form, you can make sure that you always come to this one. If you just go to the main ADS website and you've clicked on this, it will take you automatically to the classic form, so you don't have to click on that tab. Default collections. So say you work in astronomy and you only ever want to see papers that are in the astronomy collection. If you click on the astronomy button right here, it will automatically limit you to only astronomy papers. You can remove that limitation for one-off searches if you need to, but just by default, it'll make it a little easier for you. It's going to take out some of the physics and computer science and those other articles for you. If you know that you use an export format other than BibTeX, say you need like Icarus or something, you can select that, and that will be the default one that pops up when you do the export citation. You can enter any custom formats you have right here. If you don't like the left and right sidebars on the search results screen, you can take those away. And then there's a bunch of other stuff you can play with. A lot of this stuff is to better define what you want your export formats to look like. And we have all of this information in the help pages, or you can hover over these little, or click on these little buttons, the little question marks, to tell you a little bit more about this information. Okay, so I think that is it. Do we have any questions? Any questions? Okay. Well, thank you very much. If y'all have any more questions, we'll be running another office hour session at 3 p.m. U.S. Eastern Time later today. So that's in 4.5 hours, if my math is right. So 4.5 hours, same place. And if you have any questions, feel free to come back and ask them then. Thank you very much.